Hi, my name is Carmel Hawk. My student number is T00701793. This is my allergy chihuahua Peanut that we'll be using today. So we'll start with the extrinsic muscles of the thoracic limb. So we have the superficial pectoral muscles. So where my hands are the superficial pectoral muscles. There's the descending portion that runs from the sternobray craniolaterally, and then there's a transverse portion which runs from the sternobray transversely, and their job is to adduct the thoracic limb, so they adduct it towards the body. And then we have the deep pectoral muscles, which are around here. The cranial portion is up underneath the superficial portion, and they also adduct the thoracic limb. So they adduct the thoracic limb and they pull it caudally, so backwards. Next we have the brachiocephalicus group, which runs from the foreleg up to the head. So we turn it sideways a bit. This is a compound muscle that is Y-shaped with two major subdivisions. So we have the cleidobrachialis, which is the region from the clavicle down to the foreleg. And then the other option is the cleidocephalicus, which is the region from the clavicle up to the head. So in total, it kind of goes from about here down to here is her brachiocephalicus. Next, we have the trapezius. So the trapezius is a triangular muscle that runs from the base of the skull down to the clavicle. So from the base of the skull here down to the clavicle, and it elevates and abducts the forelimb. So it abducts it away from the body and elevates it. And then we have the rhomboideus muscle, which lies beneath the trapezius muscle. It holds the dorsal part of her scapula to the body as well. So the rhomboideus muscle kind of comes from about here down over the scapula and sits right about there. And its job is to elevate the forelimb, so it elevates it. Next, we have the latissimus dorsi. So this is the large triangle-shaped muscle that lies caudal to the scapula. So it lays probably about here, and it covers most of the thoracic wall to the spine of the scapula. So it goes probably about this way. And its job is to draw the limb caudally. So it draws it caudally. And it also flexes the shoulder joint. So it flexes the shoulder joint. And then we have the serratus ventralis, which is a serrated muscle, and it is on the ventral aspect of the thorax. So it is here, it kind of acts as a sling, so it's underneath the scapula, and it supports the trunk. And then we have the muscles of the head and neck. So we have the sternocephalicus muscle, which is a paired muscle that attaches the sternum to the head. So it goes through from the occipital bone on either side, and it goes from the occipital bone down to the sternum, so all the way here. And it also helps to depress the head and neck and draws it from side to side as well. Next, we have the muscles of mastication. So we have on Peanut's head here, we have the temporalis muscles, which are on her temple. She thinks we're cuddling now. So the temporalis muscles, which are the largest muscles on the head, they are on the lateral and dorsal aspects of the skull, and it elevates the mandible when she's chewing to close the mouth, and it moves the mandible laterally as well. Now we have the masseter, which is ventral to the zygomatic arch on the surface of the ramus. So if she lets me turn her, there, she has her mandible, and the masseter is right here. And it elevates the mandible to close the mouth while chewing. Next, we have the digastricus, which is the thin superficial muscle on the ventral caudal edge of the mandible. So it is it's about here, along here, and it helps open the mouth. And then we have the mylohyoideus muscle, which is a thin sheet of muscle that forms a sling for the tongue. So it is, you can't really see it on her, but it'll be in here, and it raises the floor of the mouth. Next, we're going to point out a couple of our salivary glands and lymph nodes. So on Peanut, we have our parotid salivary glands. Our parotid salivary glands sit about here. And then we have the mandibular salivary glands, which are around here under the mandible. And then we have the mandible lymph nodes, which are in the same place. They're kind of here underneath when you pinch out our chin. And then we have the prescapular lymph nodes too, which are in here. So by her scapula, your head up. Prescapular lymph nodes would be felt in here. Next, we have the intrinsic muscles of the thoracic limb we'll start with. So we have the deltoideus muscle, which consists of two parts that join together under the infraspinous muscle. So it is about here, right here, and its job is to flex the shoulder joint. And then we have the infraspinatus muscle itself, which is caudal to the spine of the scapula. So it would sit about here, and it flexes the shoulder joint and also abducts at the limb of the shoulder. Then we have the supraspinatus muscle, which is cranial to the spine of the scapula. So it sits about here, and it extends the shoulder joint. Then we have the subscapularis muscle, which is on the inside of her leg. So it is on the medial aspect of the scapula underneath here, and it adducts the limb at the shoulder and rotates the leg medially. So I'll show you on this leg now. So it adducts, and then it also rotates medially. So it turns her leg in and out. Next, we have the teres major muscle, which is caudal to the suprascapularis muscle. So it is under here. So it lays in through here, and it helps to flex the shoulder as well. And next, we have the biceps brachii muscle. So on the craniomedial surface, we have the where it inserts on the humerus onto the radius. So it sits about here. Peanut, you guys stand up. So it sits on her legs about here. And this is helps her to flex the elbow. So flexes her elbow, and it extends the shoulder too. Next we have the brachialis muscle. So this wraps from the lateral side of the humerus to the medial side of the radius and ulna. So it comes from here, and it wraps around to her radius and ulna, and its job is to flex the elbow. So flex the elbow. Next we have the triceps brachii muscle, which is the three-headed muscle on the caudal aspect of the humerus. So that is right around here, and her basically what it does is it's on the edge of the scapula and also on the proximal humerus, and it extends the elbow, and it flexes the shoulder too. Now for the digital flexors and extensors, we have the digital and carpal flexors, which are on the, they kind of run down the dorsal aspect of the radius and ulna, and when they contract, all the muscles in the carpus flex. And then the extensors are on the front side, or the cranial side of the radius and ulna, and when they contract, they pull forward, extending the carpus and the limbs. And then I will point out her popliteal lymph node as well. So her popliteal lymph node is back here. So you would feel it there. And then we're going to go to the pelvic limb. So the tensor fasciae latae muscle is the triangular shaped muscle that sits about here. So it has two portions off the cranial wing of the ilium, and it helps to flex the hip joint and extend the stifle. And then we have the gluteal muscles. So there's the superficial, the middle, and the deep. So the superficial gluteal muscles sit about here, and it's a small triangular muscle of the sacrum. And then we have the middle gluteal muscles, which are like an egg-shaped cranial to the superficial ones, and then they're caudal to the tensor fasciae latae as well. So they kind of sit in between, right around here. And their job is to abduct the limb. So we abduct the limb and extend the hip. So extend the hip. Extend the hip, please. Thank you. Next, we have the biceps femoris muscle, which is the longest, widest muscle of the thigh. And it covers the entire caudolateral aspect, I guess you could say. So it is this portion of leg here, and its job is to extend the hip, So it extends the hip, and it flexes the stifle, and then it extends the tarsal joint as well. Next we have the semitendinosus muscle, which is the strap-like muscle that is medial to the bicep femoris. So it is way back here, along the back end here, and its job is to extend the hip. So we extend the hip. She doesn't love it. Extend the hip, flex the stifle, and extend the tarsus joint. Next we have the semimembranosus muscle, which is not as long as the semitendinosus muscle, but it's slightly larger, and it also runs back here, and then on the medial side on the medial side too, it comes under here, and it's there to extend the hip and flex the stifle too, so it extends the hip, flexes the stifle, and it's wedged between the biceps femoris and the gracilis. Okay, so the sartorius muscle sits about here, and you can see it medially and laterally, so it's on the inside as well, under here. And it's made up of two strap-like parts that lie on the cranial surfaces of the thigh. So it's in here. And then it helps to flex the hip, extends the stifle, and flex the stifle too. Next we have the gracilis muscle. So that is on the inner side as well. Ugh. So the gracilis muscle, here, do you want to turn this way? The gracilis muscle is in here underneath. So it's a large flat muscle that covers the caudomedial surface of the medial thigh, and it helps to adduct the limb. So it adducts the limb and it flexes the stifle, and it also extends the hip and hock. Then we have the pectineus muscle, which is a small spindle-shaped muscle on the medial aspect of the thigh. So again, it's in here, and it kind of sits way up here. It's hard to see on her. Way up under here, and it helps to adduct the limb as well, so closer to the body. Next we have the quadriceps femoris muscle. There are 4 heads on this muscle that fuse distally to form one big tendon. It is the most powerful extensor of the stifle. So looking back under here, that's way under here. So the most powerful extensor right under there, and it helps to extend the stifle joint and flex the hip joint as well. Next we have the gastrocnemius muscle, which is the most superficial muscle of the caudal leg muscles, and it consists of 2 heads, so it's called the calf muscle as well. So that is under here. So the gastrocnemius muscle is under here. This is the gastrocnemius muscle there. So it helps to extend the tarsus and flex the stifle as well. Next we have I guess I'll go through the digital and tarsal flexors too. So the flexors, the digital and tarsal flexors, are on the dorsal aspect of the limb here. So they're on the dorsal side of the tibia and fibula, and when they contract, all the muscles in the tarsal flex. And then the digital and tarsal extensors are on the cranial side of the limb, so the tibia and fibula here, and when they contract, they pull forward, extending the tarsus and the digits as well. So now we have the muscles of the abdomen. So we have the external abdominal oblique muscles. So the external abdominal oblique muscles, it covers the ventral and lateral thoracic wall, and then the lateral abdominal wall. So it goes all the way through here, and it flexes the vertebral column. Then we have the internal abdominal oblique muscles. So they're located medial to the external obliques. They are underneath, and they also help to flex the vertebral column. Next, we have the transversus abdominis muscles, which are medial to the internal oblique muscles, and they come from the last 4 or 5 ribs. So they would be about here, and they flex the vertebral column too. Then we have the rectus abdominis muscles. So the column of muscle is, it lies on either side of the ventral midline. This would be her 6-pack belly. and it's sternum to pubis. So this helps with trunk flexion. It helps with her trunk. Then we have the muscles of respiration and the vertebral column. So we have the serratus dorsalis cranialis and the serratus dorsalis caudalis. So this is deep beneath the serratus ventralis muscle along the spine. So they are down through here. And they help to lift the ribs by bringing them forward and outward with breaths. And then we have the external intercostal muscle, which is the inspiratory muscles that run ventral to the ribs and rotate the ribs during respiration. So they are all through here. And they're directed in an oblique direction so that when they contract, they rotate the ribs upward and forward. So they increase the size of the thoracic cavity. And then we have the internal muscles as well. So the internal intercostals are underneath the external intercostals. They're deeper than the externals, and they're expiratory muscles. And they're directed at right angles so that when they contract, they rotate the ribs backward, which decreases the size of the thorax. So they're underneath here. Then we have the diaphragm, which is the thin dome-shaped piece of skeletal muscle that separates the thoracic cavity from the abdominal cavity. And the contraction of the diaphragm, which increases the space in the thorax for inhalation and exhalation too. So it lies about here, I'm pretty sure, on Peanut, her diaphragm. And then finally, we have the epaxial muscles, which are located dorsal to the transverse processes of the lumbar region. So this is where we do a lot of IM injections at work. So they make up the loin muscles and extend cranially towards the head, and they go all the way down through here on either side of those transverse processes. So they're extensors of the vertebral column. They produce lateral movements of the trunk when one side of the muscle group contracts, and they are all through down here.